All right, welcome to another episode of the Home Turf Podcast. I am the host today, Jordan Epp, the head sports editor of the Battalion, Texas A&M's student newspaper. And with me, I have two guests. I have Collin Neill, who is an editor over at Sam Houston State's newspaper, the Houstonian News. What do you want to say to the audience, Collin?
I'm just happy to be here to begin this football season. Again, I'm thankful for you, Jordan, to invite me and the next guest, who I'll let you introduce to talk about this upcoming A&M versus Bearkats football game to begin both of the team seasons, and yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
And then also on my side, I have Ben, who runs the Sports of Sam Houston State account on Twitter at Sports of SHSU. Go ahead and check him out if you are interested in keeping up with anything Sam Houston State's Bearcat athletics related. But Ben, you want to say something to the audience as well?
Yeah, man, super thankful to be on third season covering Bearcat football. So super excited, kind of an interesting year for us and really exciting week one with A&M. So ready to talk about it and ready to get the season going.
Awesome. I'm super excited for this. This is a new part of the podcast, a little bit of something ancillary that I wanted to try and attack this season, try and dig into, the opponents of Texas A&M football every single week, going ahead and talking to people who are a part of the community of the opposing team every single week ahead of time before the upcoming games, be able to get a little bit of digging into the other team, get a little bit of insight onto teams, because not everyone who is going to be keeping up with Texas A&M football will be able to keep up with every other team that's also happening across the country. And even though Sam Houston State isn't that far away from Texas A&M, Sam Houston State FCS program, there's a lot of really good things that happened with that team last year. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk about what Sam Houston State did last year. Collin, would you like to give a little bit of a recap of what happened last year with Sam Houston State football? I mean, it was a very, very strong season if you look at the record. We were talking a little bit before the show. You said a little bit disappointing at the end. Just go ahead and let us know a little bit about what happened.
So yeah, this was actually coming off of the previous season winning the national championship, which against South Dakota State at Frisco, which was an amazing game. I had a couple of friends that called the game, and it was an exciting time. And then you're going into this year with your first year in the Western Athletic Conference. We were poised to make our voices, our game heard. It was a really good beginning to the season. I would say our first, very scary game was against the Battle of the Piney Woods, against Stephen F. Austin Lumberjacks, who everyone knows is the longest rivalry when it comes to schools in Texas, like the longest historical rivalry. But because Eric Schmid, who just got finished here at Sam Houston, was out with an injury, and we had to go with a backup quarterback at the little last minute. The rest of the way, though, we defeated our competition. We did exactly what we wanted. It's just that once that we got into the playoffs, we got that bye round, and then we went up against UIW, against basically Cameron Ward, who absolutely played amazing against us. And but we were able to beat them in Huntsville, and then in the middle of the playoffs, our offensive coordinator Ryan Carty was then announced to have been hired by Delaware, which is ironically our head coach Casey Keeler's previous school where he coached at. And then after that, we then lost to Montana State 42-19. So and in the middle of the season, we were announced to go to Conference USA to move up to FBS level. So despite the ending, a lot of new developments, which is heading into this season, and obviously beginning with Texas A&M.
And then for you, Ben, if you were to kind of describe Sam Houston State's season in 2021 in just 3 words, what do you think you would be able to describe it as?
Ooh, 2021 season in 3 words. I would say the longest marathon. So what a lot of people don't know is Sam Houston played 22 games in the 2021 calendar year. They played 10 games, won the national championship. They had about 3 weeks off, went into another training camp, and then they went into another season, which had 12 games. And so you had 22 games, 2 training camps within about 8 months. And it was just football nonstop for about 8 months. It was a marathon, but it was fun, man. Won a national championship, made it to the third round in the fall season. So absolute marathon, but it was fun to be a part of, that's for sure.
Now, looking into 2022 for Sam Houston State, let's kind of look at it from a macrocosmic view, kind of like looking at the team as a whole. What do you think your expectations are for the team this year, Ben? Do you expect another WAC championship? Do you expect a deep playoff run? Or do you think that this year might be a little bit of a change without getting too specific into the squad itself?
Yeah, so this is kind of a interesting year that really no one in college football has ever really been a part of in recent memory. So we're moving to the FBS next year in Conference USA, so we're not eligible for a bowl game. We're ineligible at the FBS level, and we also have additional scholarships, so we're not eligible for the playoffs at the FCS level. So you lose 16 of 22 starters from last year, so a lot of turnover there, a completely new offensive staff, not eligible for any postseason play. But you do bring in the best recruiting class transfer wise and freshman wise in school history. So not technically a lot to play for, but definitely a building year going towards Conference USA next year. So that's kind of where the 2022 outlook is right now.
And for you, Collin, with Conference USA in, do you expect the team to kind of attack this year to kind of build momentum heading into joining CUSA? Or do you think that because maybe there won't be that postseason that has often been something that Sam Houston State's been targeting in recent years, do you think that they'll maybe approach the season a little bit differently?
Absolutely. I think another thing is that our staff, the coaching staff is completely different now. One of our best hires is Cooper Bassett. He's brought on a lot of big new offensive linemen. Some committing, some transferring, and I think what's going to be very important to see in 2022 is that if getting under the new system, basically trying to see what since we aren't playing for anything this year, it'd be interesting to see how Keeler and his staff go forward. And I would like to see everyone try to get on the same page with the new system. A lot of new faces coming in to prepare for FBS play next year in the Conference USA. That's not to say though, don't try to win. It's always good to go ahead and win and do what you can to get these guys going for next year. And hopefully though we can make some noise and tell people that Sam Houston football is on the way and to the FBS level, and we have the poise and confidence to make some noise.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to dig a little bit more into Sam Houston's squad specifically because the both of you kind of referenced that, turnover is a little bit of a theme with this team. And so I wanted to dig a little bit into the departing talent that Sam Houston State saw over this offseason. One example, Ramon Jefferson, running back. He started out as a 0-star recruit from the city of Bronx, went to the University of Maine, went to community college, ended up at Sam Houston State, and then had a whole weird thing over the offseason where he went to Colorado as a transfer and then transferred to Kentucky in the end. But 1,155 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. Both led the team, was an AP All-American third teamer. Then there's also Eric Schmidt, who you mentioned earlier, 2,818 passing yards, 29 touchdowns to just 10 interceptions. Colby Thomas, offensive lineman, AP All-American third team, another big player for the team. Then Jahari K, a big defensive lineman, 34 tackles, 12 and a half for loss, 6.5 sacks, and an AP All-American second team, the highest ranking of all the players that were on Sam Houston State squad last year. And that's even higher than Zion McCollum, who was a fifth-round pick by Tampa Bay this season. Unworldly athlete. That's part of what made him go so high in the draft. 3 interceptions last year, 5 pass breakups, AP All-American third team. Just could you speak a little bit on how Sam Houston might approach this, turnover on the roster? I know that you, Collin, had mentioned that, and that both you and Benjamin mentioned a little bit about, the bringing in more people from outside. So what can you expect as the changes on the roster itself?
Yeah, I'll go first here. It's going to be a real interesting year. So obviously, with the move to Conference USA, we're no longer an FCS school, so we do have additional scholarships. You go from, I believe it's 55 or 56 up to 85 scholarships. So you have a lot more room to kind of bring in new guys, which comes at a good point because you do lose the majority of the talent from the previous year. So there's two things I'm really looking at this year. You bring in an incredible transfer class. I mean, two guys from Texas, guy from Colorado, TCU, just big name colleges all over the country and guys that have really performed well there. So how they kind of fit in this year that they have with us. Some of them have a little more than a year left of eligibility. So that's one big thing with the new roster. And then another thing is this freshman recruiting class that's on campus now was by far the number one recruiting class we've ever had. And I talked to Casey Keeler, our head coach, about 2 weeks ago, and he said that he wants to play the majority of the freshmen, but also retain their red shirts. So as far as roster construction, how much are we going to see of the freshmen? Do we want to save their red shirt year moving into FBS play? And then also, how big of an impact do these transfers make when they come in and have such a big role right away? So those are two of the things I'm kind of looking at as far as roster construction and the new guys we got coming in.
And now, Collin, what do you have to kind of add on to that as far as, adding on to what he already said, or maybe a different point that you have?
There's another guy that I would like to mention that's departing is Zion McCollum's brother, Tristan, who is now with the Texans, who I actually, on a more of a side note, went to the first preseason game for the Texans and he balled out. He got a couple tackles. He got 5 tackles, 3 solos, and 1 forced fumble during that game, which was awesome to see. And we would love to have more Sam Houston players representing the NFL, and with this move to FBS, it would definitely happen. And with these new players, and I agree with Ben. It's smart to play the freshmen, but retain that shirt and then give them that extra year or two to play in the FBS level in the Conference USA. Some of the guys I can name right off the bat. Desmond Jackson, graduate transfer from Oklahoma State. With Ramon Jefferson gone, he will definitely be someone that will step up. And following along behind him is Zach Hrbacek, who I'm high on. Honestly, he made some. Even though he played limited snaps last year, he made a lot of impact in plays. Watching him for the first time, it's just truly incredible. Like, look at his film if you ever had the chance. And also with Jordan Yates, the transfer from Georgia Tech, and it probably is going to lead to another topic, but just with how Sam Houston was able to, get talent back to replace not only the production that was there, but potentially have more production out of the replacement. Because it's not about replacing the players, their names. It's about replacing the project. It's all about replacing the production with just the same amount of production, and like I said, potentially even more.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about the McCollum brothers. I don't think a lot of people realize that Zion and Tristan were going to go. Well, people outside of Sam Houston State probably don't know. They were going to go to another school initially at the D1 level over on the West Coast, I believe, and they ended up retracting on that and ended up staying locally because they are from the Galveston area, if I'm not wrong, and wanted to go to a place closer to home.
Yeah.
And also Jaquez Ezard, basically our guy, like one of the best return men in the country, in our opinion. And I don't know if you know our typical unofficial slogan. I don't think we can say it on here, but it's if you don't know, if I'll let Ben say it. Don't say the bad one.
Yeah, if you're talking about Jaquez Ezard, just go watch the final seconds of the national championship and watch what he says to the national television. It sticks with us.
Jaquez Ezard, another former Sam Houston State player that's now, I believe, floating around NFL rosters. I think he was in Washington for a short period of time. I don't know where he's at right now, but he'll probably be one of those guys that floats around practice squads. But to build off of your mentioning of Jordan Yates, that does fill into the next topic of who is starting at quarterback. Texas A&M is another school that, we just announced who the starting quarterback is going to be. Literally today, Coach Jimbo Fisher, today being Monday, August 29th, came to the press conference and officially made it official that Jimbo Fisher will be starting our redshirt sophomore quarterback, Haynes King. And that kind of comes off of a little bit of a debate on whether or not it'd be Haynes King, whether or not it'd be junior LSU transfer Max Johnson. But there's a little bit of a similar thing going on at Sam Houston State. I don't know if there's been an official announcement as far as I was able to find, but there seems to be two guys that are the likely replacements for Eric Schmidt, who we mentioned earlier. Keegan Shoemaker, a junior who played last year in relief for Schmidt when he was hurt. And he is a transfer from UL Lafayette. And Jordan Yates, who is a redshirt sophomore transfer from Georgia Tech, who Collin mentioned earlier. But let's kind of talk about them two, and who do you think might start this upcoming game against Texas A&M, Collin?
So yeah, you're right about it not being official yet. I would think probably in the next, I mean, if I were to predict on my own, and my gut tells me we'll learn about a starter on Wednesday or Thursday. But it's hard to tell because Shoemaker has been under our system longer, along with Trapper Pano, who I think deserves to be recognized too. He made a couple of he's made big plays in his time here. But if it were to come down to it, I think Yates might be the one to get the start because he has more experience on the bigger level, a higher level of college football play. But I wouldn't be surprised if I see Shoemaker as a starter as well because he's been under the Keeler system more. In the end, it's up to Keeler. It's whatever he wants to go, and whichever way he goes with, I will go with. I don't think you can go wrong with either.
Yeah, Jordan Yates coming out of Georgia Tech. I forgot to write down the exact number, but he started multiple games for the Yellow Jackets last year. And for you, Ben, between Shoemaker, Yates, what do you see coming out of that whole little battle? Do you have a person that you have in mind who you think might be the starter, a person you might prefer to see be the starter?
I don't know if I have one that I would prefer to be the starter. I think whoever the staff decides to be the starter, I'm going to roll with, like Collin said. But it's going to be really interesting. So Shoemaker, he actually went to a school called Lafayette, which is a small FCS school up in the Northeast, and in the Patriot League, which is a small FCS league. But he was FCS Freshman of the Year in that league. Was really good. Was the local guy to Sam Houston, so he came back. Texas kid. I think they're both going to be really good. I think they can both be really good, and I think this year is going to be about finding the guy for Conference USA. I think either one could be the guy, and I think we're going to figure out here soon who it's going to be. But also another thing I've been telling people is that in 2018, Sam Houston used Eric Schmidt and Ty Brock for the first 3 games. Didn't decide on a QB. Keeler didn't decide on a QB until conference play came up. So I've been telling people we might not get a starter, an official starter. We might be rolling with 2 guys for a couple weeks until they figure out what they want to do. So we should figure out here in the next couple days what their plan is. But I would probably lean with Jordan Yates, but I'm undecided. I don't know who it's going to be. Nobody really knows. They haven't really leaked anything. I haven't heard anything from the people I know within the program. So could be 2 starters. It could be one of them. Not too sure, but I'm excited to see both of them play. That's for sure.
Definitely sounds akin to sort of what was coming out of Michigan with both McCaffrey and McNamara being the starters for week 1 and week 2, and then them deciding later on. Let's kind of get into a little bit more of the teams from a offensive and defensive perspective. I'll go ahead and start it off with you, Ben. But out of the offense and defense, what do you expect from the 2 units, and which one do you expect to maybe be one better than the other? Is there something that A&M people will have to watch out for on one side versus the other?
Yeah, I'm gonna say if there's a side that I would lean with right now, that it would definitely be the defense. You retain the entire defensive staff from last year. On offense, new staff, and you lose 4 of your starting 5 offensive linemen. On the defensive side, while you do lose a lot, you bring in 3 Division I transfers on the D line. You return your whole linebacking core. for the most part. And then you bring in 3 Division I transfers at the DB position, including BJ Foster, who was an all Big 12 player at Texas. And so the defensive side, I think, is going to really be a strength this year. On the offensive side, like I said, new staff, lose most of your offensive line. But I do think our weapon, we return pretty much all of our receivers and running backs, except for Jaquez Ezzard and Ramon Jefferson. But you replace them with a guy like Alvonte Woodard from Texas, and then you also replace Jefferson with Desmond Jackson from Oklahoma State. So more unknowns on the offensive side, a lot of potential, but I think if I'm going to bet on one side, it's probably the defense right now.
And kind of a similar question for you then, Collin. If Sam Houston State is going to be successful this year, do you think it is going to most likely be as a result of the offense or as a result of the defense?
I mean, I am gonna agree with Ben on the fact that defense will be definitely something to watch. I think will definitely be a strength more so than the offense. However, I do think with the offense though, I would definitely like to like I said earlier, I definitely like to see what they do, what they can do. Trying to get used to Keeler's new system. I mean, I'm more of looking at guys like Cody Crest, who's returning this season. Desmond Jackson, I mentioned earlier. I think those guys can really cause some damage, and whoever's at quarterback, whether it's Yates or Shoemaker, either way, they will have some good people to throw to. And also Noah Smith is another name that pops up in your head. You and Trapper Panel again can be that guy you can put in goal line situations or some tough third down situations, whatever you want to do with him. I mean, he's a guy that can be reliable in all sorts of situations. And I also think our special teams will be something to watch out too. I know it's just offense and defense, but I think special teams is a very important part of football. We still have Seth Morgan, who's just been amazing for us these past few years. He might be getting a lot more opportunities this year. You never know. But overall, I would agree with Ben on the defensive side being our strength this year. But I wouldn't be surprised if the offense starts showing out some interesting things this season.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up some of the pass catchers at Sam Houston State. A lot of the production that came in the air is being retained, even if the quarterback is going to be a little bit different. So let's kind of tie this all into talking about specifically the Texas A&M Sam Houston State game. Let's talk about what are your expectations for the game. Collin, what would you want to see come out of the Sam Houston State team? Like, what would you expect to see, and what would you be happy with seeing as a result?
I don't know for sure. I mean, if you look at our history, we've obviously not had great success against A&M. However, I would love to see that we keep it close for a bit. I'm not saying we're gonna win or lose. My expectations is to see how the players are. If we can really like fight against these big dogs in the FBS. Overall, I just like to see how we do with all these new players, and I expect us to just no matter what the score is, no matter what happens, those guys are going to keep fighting. I'm good friends with some of them outside in class. I mean, I get the same thing. Like they're going to keep fighting. They're gonna try to find a way to win, try to find a way to like make the other opponent's life a living heck. So overall, I'm expecting a pretty interesting game. I can't wait to see what happens.
And for you, Ben, in a similar vein, what would be the minimum that you would want to see out of the Sam Houston State game? Is it similar to what Collin said, where you just want to see competitiveness? I mean, I harken back to the game that A&M had last year against Kent State at the beginning of the season, where Kent State gave them a run for the money in the first half, and then A&M kind of kicked themselves into shape during halftime. Is that a similar thing as to where that's kind of what you would hope to see out of the team?
Yeah, I'd love to see him keep it competitive, absolutely. And I feel like we can for a little bit. I've been looking at the past scores when we played A&M when they had Johnny Manziel, Mike Evans, and we were kind of an FCS power back then too. I mean, it was a 19-point loss and a 37-point loss. So I'm thinking somewhere in a 20, 30-point game, but if we can keep it close for a half, 3/4, I think that'd be great. I'd also love to see us stay healthy. That's a big thing. Obviously, when you go up against a team like A&M, first game of the year, haven't really put the pads on a lot to start the year. A little worried about injuries. That's one thing. And then another thing I really want to see is the new offense. What does it look like? I've seen and I've heard that we're going to be playing under center a little bit this year, which we haven't done in years. Not really a Sam Houston thing to do. So what does this new offense look like? And also, who's the quarterback going to be, and what's that look like? So keep it competitive, stay healthy, try to figure out the offense. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Now, if you were to kind of go a little bit more into a prediction, I'm not expecting you to necessarily throw out a score or anything like that, but what is your expectation for how the game will ultimately result?
Yeah, I think like you said about Kent State, and I think this happens a lot with big schools early on. Evenly matched the first 2 weeks. I talked to Keeler a couple weeks ago. He said they think they have an advantage early on because nobody has film on us. We don't even have film on our offense from last year, so because it's a completely new offense. So I think we can keep it close for a little bit. I think that would be really great. But that's kind of my expectation. If I had to throw a score out, I know you said we didn't have to. I'm thinking maybe 45-20, 45-21, somewhere around there. So that's kind of what I'm expecting on Saturday.
And I haven't looked at the Vegas line, so I'm not sure exactly where it's sitting currently.
Not out
But
yet.
I know that Jimbo Fisher, in a press conference, had specifically said not to necessarily be too light on Sam Houston State because he was talking about this is a talented team. So for you, Collin, what do you think that your prediction for the game is? Do you think that Sam Houston State will, keep it competitive for a while, or do you think that what are your expectations?
I think we are going to keep it competitive for a while. I think that's all that matters is this if this new staff and new roster, or not necessarily new roster, just a bunch of new players to see if they can compete, keep it up against Texas A&M. If I were to say a score, I'm gonna be a little bit bold, and I'm gonna say 35-21.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming along for this ride. I'm super excited about this podcast series that I'm going to be doing. Next week is going to be Appalachian State. So tune back in a week for that one for everyone who's listening to this. I have a lot of people locked and loaded for the season. I'm very excited to see where this goes. And make sure that you check out Collin and check out Ben on everything. Collin, as I mentioned, works with the Houstonian News at Sam Houston State. You can find him on Twitter at chill_side22. And for Ben, you can find him on Twitter at sports of SHSU. And I will be able to say that it was a blessing getting to talk to y'all. I'm super excited about the season, super excited to kick things off against y'all. And I'm going to wrap this podcast up. Thank you guys for being here. Y'all got one quick thing to say?
Eat 'em up, cats.
Eat 'em up, cats.
Yep.
All right. See y'all later, and thank you.